Mondays, the Supreme Court is expected to tightly restrict or ban race-based affirmative action in college admissions. The ruling could come as soon as tomorrow or as late as Friday, June 30th, before the justices leave for their summer break. Hunter Biden's agreement on Tuesday to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes capped a 5-year investigation without allegations of wrongdoing by the president or presumably prison time for his youngest son. But on the other hand, it put Hunter once again in the crosshairs of Mr. Biden's adversaries, who instantly complained that the wayward son got off too easy. A federal judge in Arkansas on Tuesday struck down the state's law forbidding medical treatments for children and teenagers seeking gender transitions, blocking what had been the first in a wave of such measures championed by conservative lawmakers across the country. The decision was hailed as a significant victory for the LGBTQ community, delivering a dose of certainty for transgender youth in Arkansas who had worried for nearly 2 years about losing access to puberty blockers and hormones. Well, the New York State Legislature gave final approval yesterday to legislation that provides legal protection for New York doctors to prescribe and send abortion pills to patients in states that have outlawed abortion. The measure, along with similar new laws in several other states controlled by Democrats, could significantly expand medication abortion access by allowing more patients in states that restrict abortion to end pregnancies at home without traveling to states where abortion is legal. Well, the math and reading performance of 13-year-olds in the United States has hit the lowest level in decades. Now, this is according to test scores released today from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is the gold standard federal exam. Now, the last time performance was this low for 13-year-olds was in 1990. Representative Lauren Boebert introduced articles of impeachment yesterday against Joe Biden. And today, the House censored Adam Schiff. You are listening to Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. Coughing a little, but this is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2, and in this hour, we go behind the headlines and we dig deep on those stories that everybody is talking about. And unless you've been under a rock, you have probably heard that the Department of Justice wrapped up its 2-year investigation of the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, they were asked to go into this police department after we all witnessed George Floyd brutally murdered before our very eyes in May of 2020. Now, some would say the request for the Department of Justice to go into that police department happened as much as a decade before George Floyd's brutal murder. But it was after his murder where we saw the Justice Department start to look into not only the Minneapolis Police Department, but other police departments around the country. Police departments where activists have said there's a history of unconstitutional policing, racial profiling, and excessive force, mostly aimed at people of color. Now, the Department of Justice announced its findings as it relates to that Minneapolis Police Department almost a week ago, a little less than a week ago, and it documented the just abuses inside that department. The report was actually far worse than I think any of us had anticipated. The report involved interviews with more than 2,000 people and described a police agency that's rife, and I do mean that seriously, rife with excessive force, racial profiling, lack of accountability, military-style training, and as we, all witness, again, police officers that were employed like Derek Chauvin. He was not alone. Derek Chauvin was not a lone actor. He was representative of so many of the officers employed by that police department. The report is 89 pages long. It contains metrics that give examples of unconstitutional policing. For example, give you this one example. There's an example of a Black motorist in Minneapolis, the report gives us examples that Black motorists in Minneapolis, not one, but Black folks in general who drive cars in Minneapolis are 6 times more likely to be pulled over for no reason than a white driver. Again, get that the report revealed that if you were driving a car, driving while Black in Minneapolis, you were 6 times more likely to be pulled over than your white counterpart that could be driving a car right next to you. And all of this evidence, all of these, these findings by the Department of Justice led the federal government to intervene and to basically come up with a plan called a consent decree and force this police department to agree to have a monitor placed over the police department and to have its police department under the supervision of this monitor, who will be appointed by a federal judge. And I don't know, this report just really struck a chord for me, because for the last couple of years, I've been talking with activists on the ground in Minneapolis, and I've heard of some of the horrific stories that activists either encountered personally or they had personal accounts of from individuals in that community. So I cannot imagine that the findings of this report came as a shock to those that have been working for criminal justice reform in Minneapolis for years. But I wanted to take this entire hour to unpack that report, to get the response from one of the activists that has been literally working on this now probably more than a decade, because I think it's important when these kinds of reports when they come out, we ask how the community, what does the community think? How do they feel about the findings, but more importantly, about the efforts to move forward to reform this police department? So when we come forward, I have Neikma Levy Pounds joining us. She is a civil rights attorney. She's an advocate. She's the author of J is for Justice. She also was the president of the NAACP in Minneapolis. She has been on the front lines of many of the protest movements and activations that occurred in that city over the last several years. So I'm excited to have Neikma join us to help us understand what this report means, how it landed with the community, and what are people in Minneapolis thinking about reform and how reform is possible in a department that is, by all accounts, pretty rotten to the core. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for Black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of Black audiences are concerned about the lack of Black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the Black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% Black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black. Your Black. Your Black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4, only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview.
All right, I am back, and I'm talking in this hour with Neikma Levy Pounds. She's a civil rights attorney, advocate, and author of J is for Justice. She is also the former NAACP president in Minneapolis. Neikma, I want to start with just the initial responses from folks on the ground when this scathing report was released. And I watched that press conference standing there with Merrick Garland, members from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, the mayor of Minneapolis, and other city officials. Tell us what the response of activists were when the report's findings were read out.
Well, we had our own community response that took place about 15 minutes after the end of the DOJ's press conference. So we had activists and organizers and community members standing up and reacting to what we heard. And of course, you know that we were not surprised by the information that was brought forward by the Department of Justice. Actually, after George Floyd was killed, we once again, for the umpteenth time, called upon the Department of Justice to investigate the Minneapolis Police Department. Back in the day, there was actually a mediated agreement between the community and the Department of Justice regarding the Minneapolis Police Department, and there was never really any accountability. And so we knew that it would take something a little bit stronger than what had happened before in order for city officials in Minneapolis to get the message that this is a serious issue, that the Minneapolis Police Department is out of control and it's time for it to be overhauled.
Yeah, I just want to read some of the examples that are cited in the report that led to the conclusion that this department needed a complete overhaul. For example, on page 44, here's an excerpt from that page. It says, during a May 2020 protest following the murder of George Floyd, a lieutenant was caught on camera expressing racist assumptions about Black people. And this is the quote: "I love to scatter them, but it's time to effing put people in jail and just prove the mayor wrong about his white supremacists from out of state." Now, although this group probably is predominantly white because there's not looting and fires, another officer agreed. The report notes that the lieutenant oversaw the department's training in use of force. Now, obviously, this is a position where he had enormous influence. So this is a lieutenant overseeing the use of force training, saying, "I'd love to scatter them, but it's time to effing put people in jail," and basically prove the mayor wrong about white supremacists coming in from out of state. The racist part is him to say, well, they probably are white because it's not looting and fires. The implication being they would be Black if it was looting and fires. When you read an example like that, what is the response of the community to that kind of comment from a lieutenant that's over the use of force training?
Again, unfortunately, Areva, we are not surprised. When you think back to what happened on May 25th of 2020 when George Floyd was killed, as you may recall, you and I have had this conversation about what happened that day, where someone from the community, a woman whose husband had been killed by police, posted that Minneapolis police had killed someone, that they had choked him or crushed his throat or something like that. I looked online, I saw nothing. So then I called the chief of Minneapolis police at that time, Madira Arredondo, and I asked him if Minneapolis police had killed someone. His response was no. Someone had been killed as a result of a medical emergency, but MPD didn't kill that person. Now, later, of course, when we saw the video, when more information came out, we saw exactly what happened. But the reality is that there are sergeants and higher ups in the department who intentionally concealed that information. They had no idea that it was going to blow up the way that it did. So they thought that they could manipulate the facts and information and essentially rubber stamp lies. And that's because that's what they're used to doing. That is the culture. If you recall, Derek Chauvin was actually a field training officer, despite a long history of engaging in excessive force, almost killing people, particularly a Black woman who was a mother, as well as a 14-year-old boy. He used a similar maneuver. How did he rise to the ranks of being a field training officer, a person who demonstrated authority over other officers with that kind of record? So that goes to show this is a part of the culture within the Minneapolis Police Department, and they've been allowed to get away with this kind of conduct for years.
Yeah, some of these examples, Neikma, are just shocking. Here's another one. And I just want to go through these examples because we have heard pushback from Republicans. We know under Donald Trump's administration, he pretty much shut down the Civil Rights Division, particularly these kinds of investigations where the DOJ would go into police departments that had a history of racial profiling or use of excessive force. Donald Trump said, no, our police departments are fine. Leave them alone. Give them more money. Applaud them. Back the blue. We heard a lot of that. And then to know that this kind of conduct was happening in Minneapolis as folks like Donald Trump and other Republicans were saying basically hands off our police departments. Here's another example. In a Minneapolis precinct station in 2019, officers, this is a year before George Floyd is murdered, this is in 2019, officers decorated a Christmas tree with a Newport cigarette pack, malt liquor cans, and a cup from Popeyes. Super racist stuff. This is a quote from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey lamenting to federal investigators. So he's lamenting about this conduct in this precinct. Now, at the podium on Friday, Garland highlighted a 2015 traffic stop involving a Somali American teens or a group of teens. And at one point, one of the teens told an officer, "You're racist, bro." And this is how the officer replied. He says, "Yep, and I'm proud of it. Do you remember what happened in Black Hawk Down when we killed a bunch of you folk? I'm proud of that. We didn't finish the job over there. If we had, you guys wouldn't be over here right now." And this is a police officer talking to a Somali teenager, telling him, "I'm a racist and proud of it. I wish we had killed all of you," talking about Somalians, because if we had, you wouldn't be over here right now. This is, so what this tells us, Neikma, and the report highlights it wasn't just animus and racial profiling as it relates to African Americans, it was also Native Americans. Why were they the subject of the ire? We know why Black folks are hated in this country. Why were Native Americans, if you know, targeted by the Minneapolis Police Department?
Well, I think they were targeted for similar reasons as African Americans, being seen as disposable, thinking about our heritage and the way that we have been stereotyped, the way that we've been denigrated. And in the city of Minneapolis, we actually have a relatively large Native American population. And I moved here in 2003, and I remember hearing the stories about Minneapolis police officers would actually, instead of arresting Native American people at the outset, they would actually put them in the back of the trunk of their squad car and drive around with them for hours. And these are stories that people would tell as if it wasn't a big deal, that, hey, this is just a part of it. So Native Americans have definitely been targeted with regard to traffic stops, with regard to excessive force and abuse in a very similar way as African Americans. I think the difference is that we have a larger population of Black folks in Minneapolis. So we've had, a disproportionate amount of contact with the Minneapolis Police Department, but the abuse and the mistreatment is very similar. Now, the incident you talked about earlier with regard to the Christmas tree, in the community, we call that the racist Christmas tree incident. And actually, that incident took place at the 4th Precinct Police Station, which is in North Minneapolis, which is a predominantly Black community. And that particular precinct was the site of a major uprising that happened in 2015, November 2015, after a young Black man, 24 years old, unarmed, was shot in the head at point blank range by Minneapolis police officers. After he was literally just standing at the back of an ambulance checking on a friend. And within 61 seconds of the officers showing up on the scene, they killed him. They were not held accountable at all. So we held an 18-day protest out in the freezing cold, standing up for justice for Jamar. And it was maybe a year or so later that this other incident happened with the racist Christmas tree. And at the time, it may have been a couple years, but at the time, the mayor and the chief actually fired those officers who were involved, and they went through arbitration. And I believe at least one of those officers got their job back. So that's probably what the mayor had been lamenting, because one of the complaints we hear when we're saying that these officers need to be held accountable, they need to be fired, is that when they go through arbitration, they might get their jobs back. And that has happened, unfortunately, on some occasions, not all, but that has been the case. So like in the streets, what do we say? The whole damn system is guilty as hell. And this is a part of what that represents.
How did you all learn about the Christmas tree incident? Obviously, the public, we are just learning about it because of the scathing report from the DOJ. But how did the racist Christmas tree incident, get disseminated to folks in the community?
We believe that someone inside the department who found the tree to be offensive leaked it. And so they actually leaked it to activists. And when we saw it, we immediately took action. We wrote a press release. We called upon those officers to be fired, and they were. And when we found out, you read off some of the contents, there were some additional ones as well, but we knew that this was about targeting the Black community and stereotyping folks and making fun of folks around Christmas time. So what we actually wound up doing was having a community response once again. We had a Christmas tree delivered to the front of the precinct. And then we called everybody in the community who wanted to come out. We had hot chocolate, we had music playing, we brought decorations, and we decorated the Christmas tree the right way in front of the 4th Precinct Police Station. And the chief allowed it to stay up throughout the holiday season. So as you can see, as these incidents happen and we find out about them, there's always some kind of community response or pushback to what's going on.
So one of the other incidents, and this was talked about at that press conference, I found this one to be just, I can't even say more appalling than the ones that we've already talked about, because each one of them is so egregious that, I'm kind of out of adjectives in trying to even describe these incidents. But the incident where the woman is being sexually assaulted in an alley, and she's trying to run for help. She's running for help, and she taps on the window of a police officer, and he says he's quote unquote spooked, and he shoots and kills the woman who's being sexually assaulted.
Well, that case is Justine Rusacek Damon. That happened in, I think, July of 2017. She wasn't actually being sexually assaulted. She lived in that neighborhood, which is a white, affluent neighborhood in Southwest Minneapolis. She called 911 because she thought she heard a woman being sexually assaulted in the alley behind her house. So what happened was that she called 911, the police showed up, she went outside and apparently tapped on the vehicle, and the officer, who was a Black Muslim Somali officer, thought they were being ambushed, and he fired his weapon across his partner, thinking he was protecting them. But he didn't assess the threat. There was no threat. This was an innocent, unarmed woman who was, I guess, trying to get the attention of the
Samaritan. Be a good Samaritan.
Be a good Samaritan, and he shot her once in the abdomen. And he actually wound up being the first officer in recent history that was actually convicted for killing someone. But we felt that they used him as a sacrificial lamb because most of the killer cops were white and they intentionally killed people, whereas this was a Black Somali officer, and it was likely an accident, although that doesn't excuse what happened in any way.
Yeah, I think it just goes to the issue of the poor training, the officers that are on the street using levels of force that are unjustified. When we come forward, Neikma, I want to talk about the police chief, the mayor, and the city council, because obviously nothing will change with this police department unless it comes from the top brass, the leadership of this police department. I know there's been a change with respect to who the chief is now versus who the chief was when George Floyd was murdered. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. More with Neikma Levy Pounds after some news, sports, and traffic.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for Black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of Black audiences are concerned about the lack of Black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the Black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% Black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black. Your Black. Your Black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
Tell me you're the boy that girl.
I'm young, gifted, and black. At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community.
To Areva Martin in Real Time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. And in this second hour of Areva Martin in Real Time, I'm talking with Neikma Levy Armstrong. She is a civil rights attorney. She's a former NAACP president in Minneapolis, and she is an advocate that has been in those streets in Minneapolis, leading some of the protests against police brutality and against what we now know is a pretty corrupt police department. We've been going deep on this DOJ report. DOJ went into the Minneapolis Police Department after getting many requests from advocates, from its citizens who complained about police misconduct, racial profiling, and excessive force that was being used against Blacks and Native Americans in that city. Now, the basic takeaway from the DOJ report is that the Minneapolis Police Department violated the first, which is right to free speech, and fourth, which is the right not to be illegally searched, that the police department violated the First and Fourth Amendment rights systemically, and especially in terms of its application of use of force against people of color. Now, in reaching that conclusion, it's important to understand that the department's report, the Department of Justice's report, focuses on use of excessive force. It did look at other issues such as police stops and what is often called racial profiling, but most of the report examined the racial disparities in terms of use of force. And also, we know the Supreme Court has said that questions of use of force raise constitutional questions, defining them as Fourth Amendment search and seizure issues. Neikma, so we outlined in the first 30 minutes of the show some of the horrific incidents that the Department of Justice was able to examine, instances of police excessive force that they give examples of in this 89-page report. But I want to talk about moving forward. What is the city going to do? What is the mayor going to do? And particularly the police chief. I know you had a relationship with the former chief. It was an African-American. We all saw him. We saw him testify at Derek Chauvin's criminal trial. Got to know him a little just, from watching him testify. But there's a new police chief. His name is Brian O'Hara. Tell us a little about Chief O'Hara and your thoughts about, is he the man to lead this kind of reform that the Justice Department is demanding be made by this police department?
Well, we're still honestly trying to figure that out, Areva. Many of us are just now becoming familiar with the new police chief, Brian O'Hara. He was hired because of his work in Newark, New Jersey, where he actually oversaw what was happening with their consent decree. So I believe that that's a big part of the reason why he was hired in Minneapolis, because not only do we have this Department of Justice consent decree, there's also a consent decree that will likely be entered in state court next month between the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the Minneapolis Police Department. They actually conducted an investigation over 2 years that looked back 10 years at the conduct of Minneapolis police officers. So given those two, I don't know if they're competing or complementary consent decree, that's why they hired Brian O'Hara for the job. So I think he's just becoming acclimated to Minneapolis culture, which I think is very different from many other cultures around the country. It's just a very unique place. As you know, I grew up in LA. So I've had to learn, what this culture is all about, and it definitely takes a while. So we're trying to see, where does he stand at the end of the day? Is he going to rubber stamp the status quo, or is he actually going to shift the culture within the Minneapolis Police Department and hold officers accountable? Right now, it's still a question mark as far as I'm concerned.
So we know that just by having a Black police chief, a Black mayor, a Black anything, doesn't mean that these issues of racial disparities and racial profiling and the use of excessive force targeted towards people of color goes away. We know that. The studies show that. Diversity matters, representation matters, but just being Black in a position of authority is not enough to, reform an entire police department. But with that being said, what was the community's response to moving out the Black police chief and bringing in Chief O'Hara? I recognize what you said about his previous experience. I think he had been in New Jersey. But, did the community feel like it was the right time and the best thing to do to replace the Black chief with a white chief?
Well, the Black chief, Madeira Arredondo, made a decision to remove his name from consideration for another term as chief. So he made the decision to retire. And I think everyone at that point just respected his wishes, given everything that had occurred. And he was actually, back before he was chief, he was a part of a group of, I believe, 5 Black officers who actually sued the Minneapolis Police Department and won because of the discrimination that they themselves experienced on the job. So I think that many folks in the Black community would have been supportive of another term for Chief Arredondo, but I think people respected his wishes, again, given everything that happened. But, once he decided that he wasn't going to remain as chief, a lot of us did push for a person from outside of the department becoming the new chief, just because the culture was so rotten, as you mentioned earlier.
But let's go back to the Black chief. I hear what you're saying. He was a part of 5 officers that sued the department, and that's not uncommon for Black officers in police departments, in fire departments around this country to have their own race discrimination suit against their employer. But we can't gloss over the fact that a lot of these incidents that are outlined in this report happened on the Black chief's watch while he was in that position of authority. So, talk to us about what he was up against, because I assume he didn't co-sign on this craziness, this targeting of Black folks and Native Americans. So was he up against a powerful police union? Was he up against career white supremacist police officers? I mean, what was going on that many of these incidents outlined in this report happened while he was in charge?
I think it was a combination of things. If you look at the timeline, he actually became chief right after Justine Rusacek Damon, who we talked about earlier, the white affluent woman who was killed by Minneapolis police. After she was killed, we called for the firing of the police chief at that time, a Native woman named Janae Harteau. And then Chief Arredondo became the chief after that point in 2017. And I think he inherited a department that, of course, had a number of issues. We raised concerns. We actually met with the chief on numerous occasions to bring up some of the very issues that you and I are talking about right now, including traffic stops. We looked at the data, and we saw that Black motorists were being pulled over significantly more than their white counterparts, and their vehicles were more likely to be searched. Well, it took us almost a year of sitting down with the chief and members of his staff to get them to actually make changes to the policy. I don't think it should have taken that long. I mean, the data spoke for itself, but literally we stayed at the table until finally he didn't agree to what we asked for, which was a moratorium on police doing equipment violation traffic stops. But he did agree that officers would give people a fix-it coupon rather than a citation bringing them into the justice system, so people could get their cars repaired for free. But I think change was far too slow. You know, unfortunately, during that time, we saw a lot of officers engaging in abusive behavior and not being disciplined at the rate and level that we thought needed to happen. But I think the fact that this department was allowed to get away with the kinds of abuses that happened for so long makes it a challenge when you're trying to rein them in. So we said many of them need to be fired. And I don't know what they're waiting on, but it needed to happen under Chief Arredondo, and it needs to happen now.
So we come forward, Neikma, want to talk about, again, what is the pathway forward? We know police morale in the department is at an all-time low. We know lots of folks have retired or they have quit. And it could not be easy recruiting new officers to a department that has just been put on blast, the way this Minneapolis Police Department has been put on blast. It couldn't be easy to recruit folks to come work for the police department that killed George Floyd before our very eyes. So I can imagine all of the impediments that the department faces in trying to recruit new officers. So we want to talk about what is the pathway forward, given all of these violations that have been well documented now, no hiding. It's, for the public to see, for the community to see, but there has to be a way forward. When we come forward, we're going to talk more with Neikma Levy Armstrong right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search. We are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
Tell me I'm the boy and girl who I'm young, gifted, and black.
I'm young, gifted, and black.
And that's a fact.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBL.
All right, Neikma, in this last segment, I really want to focus on the pathway forward, given, again, the plethora of violations that this department, Minneapolis Police Department, has engaged in over seemingly years, if not decades. What is the community thinking about how to bring this police department into constitutional compliance?
Lord have mercy.
I know that's a big old question. Simple, but yet so profound.
It's going to take a miracle. I mean, that's number one. But beyond that, I think with these two consent decrees, one at the state level and one at the federal level, the hope is that that is going to be a big factor in bringing about the changes that are needed. But like you said earlier, leadership really starts at the top. We need to see the mayor step up and do more in terms of using his power to hold the Minneapolis police accountable. Because the reality is that even with the recommendations by the Department of Justice, the mayor has the authority to do these things now, many of these things. And he didn't have to wait. I know that they often say, well, we've already started doing all of this. Well, we heard that before when the mayor was running for re-election, claiming that he had banned no-knock warrants. And then a few months later, we have the Minneapolis police killing of 22-year-old Amir Locke as a result of a botched no-knock warrant. He wasn't even a suspect and wound up being killed unnecessarily after we had already been promised that there was an end to no-knock warrants. So we have not seen the mayor step up in the way that he needs to and to take leadership and authority over the department. Again, the chief is still a question mark at this point just because he's so new to the position. And one faux pas that he made just recently, you talked about hiring and how difficult it is. Well, one of the things that happened recently was that the new chief, for whatever reason, signed off on the hiring of a man named Tyler Timberlake. Now, this particular officer came from Fairfax, Virginia, and he was caught on camera just weeks, maybe about 10 days or so after George Floyd was killed, brutally beating a Black man.
Wow.
And it was caught on video. And he wound up being charged, but not prosecuted. Jury let him off the hook. And he had to, and the police department had to pay that Black man a settlement for that abuse. But I'm thinking, with someone with that track record, how could they possibly get their foot in the door to become a Minneapolis police officer, given all these problems, given the culture, given the history? So we have asked the chief to fire Tyler Timberlake because it's still during his probationary period. And his response is that he's conducting an investigation. I'm like, listen, the videos are all over the internet. What more do you need to see except the anti-Blackness, the abuse, and the kind of behavior that we don't want to see from Minneapolis police officers? So it makes many of us feel like there's huge elements of business as usual, which again is why we need a state and federal intervention to begin with.
I'm thinking back to right after George Floyd's murder, when we had this big movement across the country to defund police departments. Minneapolis's city council voted to defund the police. And then there was a referendum, I guess, put on your ballot, and things happened, but essentially the defunding never occurred. Has your city council turned over in substantial ways? And do you have any faith that the city council might be more inclined to ensure that the police department is meeting the requirements of this consent decree?
Yes, our city council has turned over. I want to say at least 6 of them did not win re-election after making that pledge to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department in 2021. And part of that was because of the fact that many of those individuals were not serious about overhauling MPD or engaging in police reform, although they had known about these issues for years. So they had not taken tangible action steps to hold MPD accountable. But suddenly, when you have national news and international news and the world watching Minneapolis, they make a declaration saying they're going to dismantle MPD. And many of us did not take them seriously. We felt that they were pandering for the cameras, pandering in the name of progressivism, and still not listening to what Black folks were asking them to do. And there was so much fallout after all of that happened in our city. Unfortunately, we saw an increase in a lot of crime. In particular, we had Black children who wound up being shot and killed as innocent bystanders, or just being with their parents in a vehicle. I mean, just literally. And I think at least 2 of those 3 children during that time were shot in the head, and maybe even all 3. It was horrific. But we could see the handwriting on the wall that once you make a declaration like that, they didn't even have the power under the law at the time to back it up. We knew all hell was going to break loose. And that's exactly what happened in the city. But meanwhile, you had Black folks in the city saying, this is not what we asked for. We want a professional police department. We want a police department that treats people with dignity and respect, but we have to have somebody to call if something happens in our community. And so they weren't listening even to Black folks who we know are disproportionately impacted by violent crime. So when you look at all of those dynamics, you have elected leadership that gloss over the needs of Black folks, that have this blatant evidence in their face and still won't use their power. And so after all of that happened with the ballot measure that you mentioned, one of the other ballot questions that was on the agenda at that time was actually about increasing the power of the mayor. And so folks voted down that ballot measure to not necessarily to dismantle MPD, because I think at the time it became like a restructuring of MPD. And then there would be the leadership of MPD would be the city council, 12 city council members, and the mayor. So the chief would have had 13 bosses. And we're saying
that was voted down, but there was a referendum that gave the mayor more power.
Gave the mayor more power in the same vote. And so the mayor now actually has more authority in terms of holding the police accountable. I don't believe that the city council is going to step up and use their power. We have historically not seen that happen. And even with this situation I just mentioned with Tyler Timberlake, why haven't we heard from the city council saying this is unacceptable? how are you hiring people with this track record as part of the department? What we typically hear is silence or infighting. And we're just sick and tired of it as a community. Because again,
let me ask you this, Neikma. The mayor was just reelected. Do you have term limits in Minneapolis? Can he do 3 terms, 4 terms? How many terms can he do?
He can do, I know, at least 3 terms. I don't know if there's specific term limits, but 2 mayors ago, that particular mayor, R.T. Ryback, was the mayor for 3 terms.
And this mayor, Frey, his name is, right?
Second term, Jacob Fry.
This
is his second term as mayor.
Okay. Wow, lots going on in Minneapolis. I'm so glad that you are there. I'm glad you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. I'm glad that you are continuing to be such a vocal part of that advocate community, because it's because of advocates and activists like you that we've even gotten to this point where, like you said, there are 2 consent decrees, or what essentially are consent decrees, both at the federal level and the state level. That's going to happen really soon. We are all watching, as you said, the eyes of the nation, the eyes of the world have been on Minneapolis since George Floyd was murdered. And seeing that scathing report come out from the Department of Justice just confirmed what we all pretty much expected it to say, because there's no way a Derek Chauvin was a man acting as a solo actor. He had to be part of a system that allowed that kind of brutality and that kind of excessive force to happen, to fester. And sure enough, what we all expected to be, in some ways, that report confirmed even worse than what we had anticipated. But again, we're going to be hopeful that the new chief of police is going to reform this department, that the mayor is going to get the message that we can never go backwards, and that this police department, that the people of Minneapolis deserve better, and they are better because you are on the grounds fighting for them. Thank you so much, Neikma Levy Armstrong, civil rights attorney, author of J is for Justice, former NAACP president in Minneapolis, and just advocate extraordinaire. Appreciate you sharing some time with us and helping us understand what's happening on the ground. All right, y'all, I'm out. You can follow me on all social platforms at Areva Martin. The next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers and the Raw Report. Stay with us right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar,
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store.